In black and white digital photography, underexposure is often a good thing. It helps preserve highlight detail. But what happens when you push it too far? Can you take a really underexposed image and edit it so that it looks as good, or maybe even better, than one that's correctly exposed? Let's find out. Hi everyone, I'm Jeff Ascoff. Welcome back to another Lightroom editing video. I've been using Lightroom for over 15 years, editing and printing many hundreds of black and white images for advertising, competition, publication and exhibition. And I've also had the privilege of working on Sir Don McCullum's early digital photographs using Lightroom as my main tool. Now, black and white digital is kind of my specialization. So today we're going to take a look at underexposure and see what we can do with these two images. Okay, so let's take a look at this photograph of Sarah's, which is a little bit underexposed. This was taken at dusk in Brighton, and it's a classic case of a photograph which has captured the highlights really nicely. So we have no blown highlights, which is quite important in a scene like this, but it's made the midtones and the shadows very, very dark. Now, there's a lot of people on YouTube channels that, go on about this concept of exposing to the right. All I know as a black and white photographer is that we have to protect the highlights. The shadows and the midtones will take care of themselves, but we have to protect those highlights. So I'm happy to have my exposures, particularly in instances like this, to be anything up to 2 stops underexposed, just to protect those highlights, because once those highlights are gone, they're gone forever. Okay, and it's particularly important with a monochrome camera because we only have one luminance channel to work with. With a color image, we have 3 channels of color to work with, and one of those channels may contain detail in the highlights, which we can extract later on. Okay, so let's have a look at this image. I'm just going to straighten it. Sarah drives me mad with her horizons not straight, and I drive her mad with straightening her horizons. Ah, dear. We know, looking at this image, that we haven't got to worry about highlights. This is the main area where we've got to try and get some detail back into the photograph. Okay, now you can either lighten everything up and darken down the sky, or you can leave the image where it is and lighten up the foreground. My preference is to go with a basic overall exposure adjustment and then darken the sky down. I think it looks much more natural than trying to do it the other way. Again, if you follow this channel, if you are subscribed to this channel, you'll know that I always start with changing the profile to one of my SILVERCHROME profiles. So I'm going to use P32 because I know it always works really well with the Leica monochrome images, and immediately it's made a massive difference to the look of the photograph. Because we're very underexposed here, I'm going to use the exposure slider to give me some slack in the image. Now, in past videos, again, if you're a subscriber, in past videos, you'll have seen me use the tone curve to try and increase exposure in an image. In this particular case, it's just too underexposed. So I'm going to have to use the exposure slider to give me some help here. So I'm just going to move the exposure slider till I get to the point where I'm happy with the actual look of the image. It was dusk. I don't want it to be looking like daylight. I'm happy as it is here. I've got an area here which I'm going to have to deal with because the natural vignetting of the lens has kind of caught the edge of this area here. And I need to bring this guy out on this pebble beach as well. Next thing I'm going to do is set my black point. I'm just going to hit the option key, and you can see these areas now are going to be pure black. If you're not used to pre-visualizing the image by using the option key, then you can actually click on your icon at the top here, the little triangle at the top here, and that will do exactly the same thing. Just switch this on and you'll see where your black points are lying. Okay, and I'm happy with that. These areas should be pure black because of what they are and where they're situated in the frame. The next thing I'm going to do is take my tone curve, and I'm just going to lift the sort of upper shadows, bottom midtones. There we go. Just brought that whole area to life now. And we'll leave that as it is at the moment, and we'll come back to that in a second. What I want to do is bring the sky down. This is probably one of the very few times that I'll actually use one of the masks that are in here. Somebody picked me up on this in one of my earlier videos. Technically, the brush is a mask. I've always seen the brush as being kind of a dodge and burning tool and localized contrast and that kind of stuff. I've never really seen it so much as being a mask as such. When I refer to masks, I'm kind of referring to these hard edged masks, the subject, sky, background. Those things for me are what I would consider masks. So I'm going to use, in this instance, I'm going to use the sky mask because it's going to save me a bunch of time. And I also know that these are quite strong geometric shapes. So it's going to do a reasonable job of excluding them from the mask, which it has done. I've got a bit of a problem over here, but I'm not concerned about that at the moment. Because we adjusted the exposure to get to this point, I'm going to bring the exposure back down to get to where we started. okay, which was about there, I believe. Now, as you can see, it's starting to look a bit weird over here. Okay, it's starting to look a little bit sort of mushy in here. All I'm going to do is go to our mask and go intersect mask with linear gradient. And then I'm going to hold my shift key down and I'm just going to bring that linear gradient down. That's much more natural for me. It gives a nice balance in the frame. We don't get any of that artificial kind of sky area appearing here, there and everywhere, that which we don't actually want. The other thing I'm going to do while I'm here is I'm just going to go back into my basic panel and I'm just going to just pull the highlights down a little bit. There we go. And that just gives us a little bit more detail in these areas here. And you can actually bring the whites down as well if you want, but I'm just going to leave that as it is there. In one of my previous videos, I talk about using these sliders here, the texture, clarity and dehaze sliders, and where it is appropriate to use them. And in one of the instances, I said that a lot of people use them for bringing sort of texture and detail out in sky. So in this particular case here, we go back to this mask and we bring up our dehaze. We just want a little bit of texture in there, okay, and a little bit of clarity. So I'm going to leave that alone. I think the sky looks natural. It looks right for the photograph now. I don't want it to be too heavy and I don't want it to encroach too much on the picture. I'm going to run a brush all over this area here. It doesn't matter if I go into the highlight area there. I'm not concerned about the boat. That's not really an issue. We're not going to be affecting the boat. Okay, I'm going to take my tone curve and I'm just going to move everything up until we get that guy come out. Okay, and that's it. Don't want to do anything more than that. I'm just going to go back over this area here just to make sure that we've pulled them up. I'm just going to bring a little bit of texture out, nothing much. There, that's it. That's all I want. Now what I want to do is just lighten this area up here. As you can see, Sarah's lens is kind of vignetted this area and it's just caught them, so they're a little bit darker than I would actually like. So I'm just going to zoom in so you can see what I'm doing. And the first thing I'm going to do is take my brush and I'm just going to just dab over the top of them. That's all I'm going to do. Go to my curve. I'm going to push this area, which is the kind of higher shadow area. I'm just going to lift up like that. Okay, if we start to lose a little bit of contrast, I'm just going to bring the sort of toe of the curve here in a little bit. There we go. And if I turn that on and off, you see that's quite a difference. If you zoom out, you don't really notice the brush stroke. And if it is obvious, then just take the same brush and just blend it like that, so it doesn't look obvious at all. Right, last thing I want to do is just take my big brush again, just going to paint across the bottom here. Going to bring that down a little bit to bring our eye back into the frame. Okay, cool. I'm just going to go down the edge here and just along the top here, just to bring our eye back in. Careful not to go back over those guys again. And then I'm going to add some grain. Sarah likes medium grain from the SILVERCHROME pack. That's what she's going to get, which is fine. And then the last thing I want to do is just get rid of these little spots here. Now I like to do this in Photoshop, but I'm going to do it in here for this video. I think Photoshop's tools are a lot better than Lightroom's when it comes to this. So I'm just going to take the standard remove tool here. Just going to click over the top, bring it as close as I can. Okay, and so it just looks right. And I think that's it. Okay, so this is a shot of mine taken in London. As you can see, it's quite underexposed. The good old 28mm on a Leica with center weighted metering, and we've got a, you know, it's underexposed. Okay, in this case, it's not underexposed enough to be able to hold the really bright sky that's here, so I'm not overly concerned about that. In the last shot, the sky was a major part of the picture. In this particular shot, it isn't. Because it's so underexposed, I'm going to start off with a basic exposure adjustment. so we get in the ballpark, which is about there. Okay, I'm going to change my profile to P32 as I always do, and as you can see, we've still got quite a lot actually blown out. I'm just going to bring my highlight slider down so we can get rid of as much of that as possible. There's no detail there, it's giving me some tone there, which allows me to add grain to that area. I'm also going to turn the sharpening off. There seems to be sharpening on here, which I don't like. That's our basic starting point. Now we've increased the exposure, it's looking a little bit flat, and this is an autumnal day in central London. The sky is very bright, it's got that kind of autumnal feel to it, but that's not really showing in the picture, so I really want to be able to bring that out. So first thing I'm going to do is sort my black point out. I'm just going to push the black slider down so I start to get black in the image. You can use the little triangle to do this to show you where it's happening. Okay, I think about there is probably about right. So these areas which will be really dark shadow, basically black, I'm quite happy with that. Let's turn that off because it's really distracting. Okay, I'm going to go down to my tone curve. I'm going to push the midtones up to keep that exposure. The reason why I do this is there's my black point, and it doesn't change if I move this up and down. It still stays the same. Nothing actually changes with that black point. If you started adjusting the exposure, for example, I'll just show you this. Okay, if I adjust the exposure, the black point disappears. Okay, because you moved everything along, and then you have to try and fiddle it around to get the blacks back in again. So I'm just going to come back to where we were back there, I think it was. Okay, so I need to bring this lady out here and this young lady out as well. So let's start with this lady here. She's the darkest here, so I'm just going to zoom in. Okay, I'm going to take a brush. I'm going to paint over her face here. I'm going to go with my curve, and I'm just going to lift up. Now I'm going to use clarity here as well. Again, you'll see me use clarity in other videos. I'm just going to give her a little bit of texture, and also probably a hand as well. Okay, because of the jewelry on there, which I think is quite interesting. Okay, now her hair is blown, which is a problem. You know, that is a problem. So I'm going to try and correct that. I'm going to go and just point a brush over the whole lot, and I'm going to try and bring that down a little bit with the exposure slider first, and then with some highlights. There's no point trying to use a curve here. You won't do it. The adjustment is far too extreme. So I'm just going to use those two tools to get some detail back in. Okay, that's much better. So let's have a look. So this mask on and off. Yeah, that's great. I'm happy with that. Okay, let's turn our attention to this young lady here. Going to do exactly the same thing again. I'm just going to take a big brush, just going to paint over her face. I've got to be careful I don't blow her hair out here because her hair's okay as it is at the moment. Go to my curve. Okay, just lift her a little bit, go to clarity, bring her out. Now I want a little bit more shadow in her face here, so I'm just going to bring the shadow side down. That's it. Okay, let's zoom out. As you can see, it's already starting to take shape. Now looking as I've zoomed out, I've got an area here. This is flare. You can probably just see it on the top of her head here. This area of flare, that needs to be sorted out. So I'm just going to bring this down. I'm going to paint in there. Let's go to this part of the curve. There we go. You're not going to get rid of it altogether, but you don't want it to kind of catch your eye, I guess. And I'll do a lot of this. I'll zoom in and out a lot when I'm working, just to make sure I'm happy with everything as I'm going along. And I'm just going to paint in here. Now I'm using a command that's attached to one of my buttons on my mouse to bring up the brush tool. That's why it's happening almost seamlessly, I guess. But you can use K on your keyboard. You don't have to keep going up here and using these commands. All right, let's go back down to our texture slider. See if we can bring this jacket up a little bit more. There we go. And we're starting to get there. This area, I'm going to bring it down. Again, brush, curve. It's what I do all the time. It's how I like to work. Okay, if it's gone into here a little bit, which I think it might have done, we can just go into our erase tool and just paint that out. Actually, that's absolutely fine. Okay. It looks like it's just caught the head here. I don't think it has, but I'm just going to adjust that. So what happens, you kind of look through that's better. You look through the image and little things pop out at you all the time as to what's right and what's wrong. Big brush. Let's take all this area down. Okay, I'm gonna have to be careful I don't get a halo around this girl, so we might have to adjust that in a second, but let's just bring this area down. I'm gonna use highlights first. Yeah, you see the way that looks weird because there's no detail there, so I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna go back into my curve and do it this way. So it brings everything down, but as you can see, it doesn't really bring that sky down to the point where you notice that it looks a bit weird. Again, another reason why I like to use curves. The actual main tools in the develop module and so on are quite crude in Lightroom. I like this streak of light here, so let's just take another brush. Okay, I'm just going to do that. I'm going to go down to my dehaze. There we go. Give that a nice bit of flare. In fact, we'll just extend that over a little bit more. There we go. Okay, and then finally what I want to do is just see what this looks a little bit artificial up here with the light coming through the trees. Looks a bit weird. Big brush there. Okay, go back down to my dehaze and I'm just going to push that out. Okay, great. And then we're just going to add some grain. I like to have the push grain. Oops, turn the highlight thing off. Can you see here where it's not caught? It still hasn't caught. Look at if I zoom in. See, it hasn't caught there. Okay, I'm just going to back the grain off anyway. It's too much at the moment. I'm just going to back that off to there. But you see the way it hasn't caught? We don't want that. That's not right. So what we're going to do is go back to our original basic panel and we're going to bring the whites down and the highlights a bit more so it catches. You see it's caught now. Okay, and then I'm just going to zoom back out again. Okay, and then because I've done that, I've effectively reduced the contrast, and I'm using an adjustment mask that I made. Again, it's in one of the other videos. If you want to go and take a look at our Lightroom editing playlist, you'll see how I made this adjustment mask. I'm going to click on that, and I'm just going to add some contrast back into the image.